Mhm. Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. It's Thursday night, roughly 9 o'clock on the East Coast of the United States. And this is Neoliberalism night. Usually, Thursday programs on Empowering Democracy treat issues, of neoliberalism. Our topic for tonight is neoliberalism continuing in the United States. And what I wanted to do tonight was to show that far from ending, considerable power still exists among the partisans, of neoliberalism. They practice neoliberalism every day. They are engaged in struggle every day, often successful with the progressive opponents, of neoliberalism. So neoliberalism may be intellectually bankrupt. It may be getting the short end of any philosophical debates, but its practitioners are still out there doing their worst, doing their damage, weakening and contributing to the destruction, of our democracy. So I'm going to go through a number of articles today that in some measure or way, are illustrations of the damaging activities of our neoliberal politicians, our neoliberal office holders, and our neoliberal economists. The first piece of news I want to start with is an article by I believe it's Jessica Corbett of Common Dreams. You're seeing the article right now, at least you should be seeing it. Yes, there it is. The opener is a photo of Jay Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve. Headline is, with inflation down, economists demand Fed permanently holds dangerous rate hiking, unquote. Quote, as interest rates have risen to cool the economy, who do you think has shouldered the burden? Working people, said Robert Reich. Quote, there's no reason to continue punishing them when they aren't to blame for inflation, unquote. This piece is by Jessica Corbett, June 14, 2023. The CPI index recently showed that there's been considerable cooling of the inflation. So the Federal Reserve's interest rate setting committee on Wednesday temporarily paused hikes, an approach that progressive economists and others want the panel to continue. Federal Open Market Committee confirmation that, as expected, it will keep the federal funds rate at 5 to 5.25%, follows 10 consecutive hikes since early in 2022 that have increasingly generated concerns of a recession and major job losses. Excuse me a second. So, former Labor Secretary Bob Reich is among the fierce critics of recent rate hikes, as we saw from the quote that I read to start off discussion of this article. There was also a tweet from the patriotic millionaires who say inflation climbed 4% in the year through May. Inflation is slowly but surely coming back down to pre-pandemic levels. The Fed should not use today's news as justification for the rate hikes that will do more harm than good. That looks like a picture of people going to restaurants, perhaps facing higher prices. From the New York Times, the caption is May inflation report, price increases are expected to ease again. The rate of inflation probably moderated last month, another sign of cooling as the Federal Reserve considers pausing interest rate increases. Senator Warren has repeatedly raised alarm about the increases since last year and welcomed the newly announced pause while urging a long-term shift in strategy. Quote, with inflation falling by more than half since last summer, the Fed has finally heeded calls to halt its extreme rate hikes, unquote. Quote, the Fed raised interest rates at the fastest pace in decades, and it needs to maintain this pause or risk throwing millions of Americans out of work, unquote. Groundwork Collaborative chief economist Rakeen Mahmood, another longtime opponent of the Fed's rate hiking, said in a statement Wednesday, quote, inflation is down, the job market remains strong. We never had to choose between lower prices and a strong labor market. And Mahmood urged Powell to concede, to quote, concede that you don't have to destroy the labor market to bring down prices, unquote, which he said, quote, starts with not only skipping today's rate hike, but permanently halting this dangerous rate hiking campaign, unquote. Meanwhile, the executive director of the Groundwork, the collaborative, Lindsay Owens, highlighted a piece from Intelligencer's Eric Levitz, which declares that Harvard University economist and former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, quote, was wrong about inflation. They could have added, as he has been wrong about so much else over the last 20 years or so. He's the last person anyone should look to. I'm not quoting now, that's my opinion. And Lindsay Owens' PhD tweets, rare to see good accountability journalism. Nice to see at Eric Levitz taking on this important topic. He's right. Larry Summers was wrong about the need to drive millions out of work to drive down inflation. And progressives were right. We never had to choose. That's what the evidence seems to be showing right now. There is Larry Summers giving one of his famous smiles. The economists predicted the Fed would need to push unemployment above 5% to contain price growth. Whoops. Whoops is right. Of course, we're nowhere near 5% unemployment as yet, in spite of these outrageous efforts by the Federal Reserve. We have to emphasize here that this hiking of interest rates by the Federal Reserve, this happened because Jay Powell is a self-confessed admirer of Paul Volcker, one of the neoliberal economists who insisted on the strong medicine of rate hikes to combat the inflation of the early 1980s, which had nothing to do with demand. It had to do with oil price hikes by the Saudis. They used the wrong medicine then, too. They created a downturn then. The downturn did much to defeat Jimmy Carter in the election of 1980. And that, of course, led to 40 plus years of neoliberalism in the United States since the victory. Well, it actually started in Jimmy Carter's administration, but was accelerated, of course, by Ronald Reagan. Quote, Larry Summers was right to anticipate impending inflation in February 2021, but from the beginning his analysis was predicated on the idea that excessive stimulus would lead to unsustainably low unemployment and thus wage-driven inflation, unquote, Levitz explained. And quote again, there has never been much reason to believe that the labor market was the primary driver of post-COVID price growth. Yes, as the Matthias had been saying from the beginning. And at this point, it's abundantly clear that in 2023 America, a tight labor market will not inevitably trigger a wage price spiral. We do not need to put millions of people out of work in order to contain inflation. Larry Summers was wrong to say otherwise, unquote. Sharing the Intelligencer analysis on Twitter, Owens and Maboud's group wrote that, quote, Larry Summers presented us with a false choice between strong labor markets and inflation. Groundwork said it then and we'll say it now. We never had to choose, unquote. But what's important to emphasize here is that raising rates to contain inflation was the neoliberal solution to inflation, originally put forward by the monetarist Milton Friedman and practiced with vim and vigor by Paul Volcker during the 1980s. Jay Powell has told people on various occasions that he was a great admirer, of Paul Volcker. And so we should have expected that if we got the kind of situation we just got post-COVID, we would get the neoliberal medicine, in spite of the fact that neoliberalism as an economic ideology has been discredited now for more than 10 years. The neoliberals have been wrong about everything. They have been the cause of much suffering since the crisis of 2007, 2008, here and in Europe. But as Pete Seeger once said about Lyndon Johnson, the big fool says to go on. Larry Summers, who is another big fool or little fool, I'm not certain of his physical stature, he said to go on, and Jay Powell was glad to hear that, and he went ahead and he went on. Despite progressive experts' demands for an end to interest rate hikes, Federal Reserve officials are projecting two more quarter point increases this year. According to the Associated Press, Fed Chair Jerome Powell told reporters Wednesday that given how far we have come, quote, that's a quote, it may make sense for rates to move higher, but at a more moderate pace. It makes no sense because inflation is coming down. Critics have called out Powell and others for ignoring how corporate greed is driving inflation. Corporate price gouging, folks. It's been price gouging. Empirical studies have shown it's been supply chain disruptions and price gouging. Those are the two major factors in back of inflation. It was not labor induced demand. In fact, it was shown that that has been a minor component, okay, of inflation. But Jay Powell goes against the empirical research. Why? Because Jay Powell is a neoliberal and he's an unreconstructed neoliberal. And he was appointed by the unreconstructed liberal Joe Biden, who, as we have seen in the last couple of years, has done his best to continue practicing neoliberalism. But we will get into that as we go further. Moving to our second article. Also remember, okay, neoliberalism means increasingly austerity in government economic policy. And as many people, including myself, have previously said, austerity is murder. Let's pull up this article. There's a picture. This is from Common Dreams also. Here's a picture from our old friend, Bernie Sanders. Sanders-led panel, that's the Help Committee in the Senate, exposes Big Pharma for, quote, ripping off Americans with publicly funded meds. Quote, it is unacceptable that half of new prescription drugs invented with the help of National Institute of Health scientists now cost more than $111,000, said the Help Committee chair, urging action by the Biden administration. We should always say by the neoliberal Biden administration, to cut prices. This is also by Jessica Corbett on June 12th. Quote, what makes the greed of the pharmaceutical industry so reprehensible is the fact that the American people are paying twice for some of the most expensive prescription drugs on the market, first through their taxes and a second time at the pharmacy counter. At this point, I have to interject, taxes don't pay for anything, and they didn't pay for the development, okay, of these drugs. But it was true, it is true, that the American people were taxed. Taxing occurred along with spending because of the belief on the part of most people in the government and the Federal Reserve that taxes do pay for things and must pay for things. So they legislate the taxes when in many cases they don't have to do so. So the American people were paying twice because their legislators forced them to pay for things that did not have to be paid for. I shouldn't say force them to pay for things, but tax them because the legislatures thought that the taxing was necessary to pay for things. That's according to U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, who chairs the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Health Committee, and on Monday released a report revealing how Big Pharma is, quote, ripping off. It's ripping off Americans with medical treatments that publicly funded experts helped to create. Oh, and by the way, of course, the federal government has march-in rights on all of these pharmaceuticals, where it can take over the patents for things like excessive pricing. However, Mr. Neoliberal Joe Biden doesn't exercise any march-in rights because he assured the neoliberal elites at the start of his campaign that don't worry, nothing will fundamentally change if I get elected president. Sanders' staff tracked the prices generally set by private corporations of medical treatments developed with the help of scientists from the U.S. National Institutes of Health, NIH, over the past 2 decades. Quote, it is unacceptable that half of the new prescription drugs invented with the help of NIH scientists now cost more than $111,000. I think there he's talking about the annual cost of those drugs. A long advocate of policies to reduce healthcare costs, including a nationwide shift to Medicare for all, the focus of the bill the senator introduced last month, Representatives Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington, and Debbie Dingell, Democrat of Michigan, have just been joined by the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, Dee Pierce.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
Hello, Dee. I'm glad you are here.
So am I.
We have been going over articles, that are illustrations. I'm sorry, Dee. I kicked over the cable connecting my computer to the internet
Oh, okay.
for just a few seconds. So that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was saying when I was doing that is we're going over articles that show the practices of neoliberalism still continue. The first article we went over was about Jay Powell, who had raised interest rates for so long in spite of all the evidence that it had nothing to do with labor, that it was all about uh, supply chain disruptions and price gouging, and yet the Fed kept on raising interest rates, causing workers to suffer. Now, thankfully, they have paused, but it's important to realize that they were giving us the neoliberal medicine for inflation prescribed by Milton Friedman and Paul Volcker.
Mm.
So I needed to make that point. I'm now on our second article for the night, and that second article is about Bernie Sanders and the Health Committee's recent complaints. And I'll just read what I just read in the last paragraph to start us off. Quote, it is unacceptable that half of new prescription drugs invented with the help of NIH scientists now cost more than $110,000, unquote, said Sanders, a longtime advocate of policies to reduce healthcare costs, including a nationwide shift to Medicare for all, the focus of a bill that the senator introduced last month with Representatives Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington, and Debbie Dingell, Democrat, of Michigan. Well, what does this have to do with neoliberalism, you may ask? Well, it is part of the Washington Consensus and
Mm-hmm.
part of the neoliberal doctrine
Okay.
that there shouldn't be price controls on products, that we should never use price controls, that we should hardly ever regulate business, no matter what they do, but that we should always leave it to the market. And so this behavior
Mhm.
is quite consistent with Joe Biden's assertion, the neoliberal Joe Biden's assertion, that as president, if he is president, nothing will fundamentally change. And it certainly hasn't when it comes to the pharmaceutical companies price gouging with respect to prescription drugs. This is price gouging in the prescription drug area, and it's been an important element of inflation.
Mhm.
Important cause inflation and what, Bonnie?
I wonder how many children have died because they couldn't afford the uh, prescription.
So Bonnie wonders how many children have died because their families weren't able to afford, okay, the prescriptions. Uh, I wonder myself how many people have died, okay,
Right.
altogether because they couldn't afford their prescriptions and because they had to cut back on their prescriptions. And they were only taking them half the time or a third of the time. There was a tweet by Reshma Ramachandran, uh, and she said, essential reading from at Senator Sanders at Help Committee Dems on U.S. taxpayers' immense contributions through at NIH, the development of new treatments. Despite this, the median price of new treatments is 111,000. Again, I assume that is annually. And U.S. taxpayers almost always pay more than other countries for these publicly funded treatments. I am being joined by someone else now.
But I wanted to add too is that in the whole neoliberal scheme of things, they refer to the people that can't afford things as useless eaters.
Yes, yes, they do. That is the neoliberal way of doing things.
Hello,
Well,
Greg.
everybody, say hello to Gregory Mallard, who
Well,
joined.
hello there from Green Party Central, where we're going to dump the neoliberalism. We're making up plans.
Okay, I hope you dump the neoliberalism inside of the Green Party itself, because there certainly is some of that inside of the Green Party, as we see among the international Greens in Europe.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the
It's very prevalent there.
yes, it's very prevalent there. I think it's less prevalent here, but I think there are still parts, okay, of neoliberal economics in part of the Green Party here that
Mhm.
should be excised. So we've been
Yeah.
going over articles that illustrate the practice, okay, of neoliberalism in this country still. And we started off with an article on Jay Powell and the practice of raising interest rates to choke off the labor market, and how prevalent that is and how unjust. And we have now been going through an article uh, that was created to report on Bernie Sanders and the help committee's statements on the median price of new treatments, specifically 111,000 per year, uh, and making the point that U.S. taxpayers almost always pay more than other countries for these publicly funded treatments. And here's a chart. Kind of hard to read that chart. Let's see if we can get it better. Is it showing up on the screen here?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I shifted over to Twitter. I wasn't sure it was going to come through, but uh, anyway, on the side there's a bunch of drugs, okay, new treatments, and the manufacturers and the drugs, uh, okay, the diseases used for the treatments. Uh, things like cancer, hemophilia, severe mouth sores, also leptin deficiency, depression, HIV, more cancer. And when they were FDA approved, and the US price of those drugs, which is hugely, I mean, just absolutely hugely ridiculous. Okay, for Abecma, I guess that's what it's called, which is a multiple myeloma treatment, the US price is $450,000. The international price, for example, in Germany, is $260,000. Now, $260,000 is outrageous,
Hmm.
but it isn't as outrageous as $457,000. There's an emergency contraception drug known as Ella. I guess that was approved in 2015. Its U.S. price is $40. Its price in France is $10. Then there's Hemogenics. It's for hemophilia B. It was approved in 2022. Its U.S. price was $3.5 million. Its international price, is unknown. I guess it probably hasn't had a chance to spread internationally. But 3.5 million, phew. The government should exercise margin rights on that drug and immediately make it affordable. Then there are various other examples. I'm not going to go through the whole table because we have a lot to go through tonight. But that's the kind of thing we're seeing. Why are we seeing it? Because of the influence of neoliberalism, on people, and the idea that there should not be price controls on pharmaceutical companies, that we should let them set their own prices. And that is causing people all over the country and people in other countries to suffer. So I will go back to the original article here and continue with that. Okay, the new report states, this is a report from the Health Committee, Bernie Sanders' committee in the Senate, that, quote, U.S. taxpayers virtually always pay more than people in other countries for treatments that NIH scientists helped invent. For example, a trio of Johnson & Johnson HIV treatments, Prescobix, Prezista, and Simtuza, cost from $25,000 to $56,000 annually in the United States, while patients in various other countries can get them for $4,000 to $10,000 per year. So I have to say to the American people on this is a message for the American people. Suckers! You guys are all suckers. You should be on the butts of your congressmen and senators every day this year to get them to hector the president of the United States to exercise marching rights on these drug companies. There is no reason for this crap. What happened to Don't Tread on Me? Quote, the price of some of these taxpayer-funded drugs is now over $1.9 million, unquote. Sanders highlighted, referring to Myolept, which is manufactured by Amert Pharma to treat leptin deficiency and costs $580,000 a year in France. So it's 1.9 million here, 580,000 in France. I'm surprised the French allow them to get away with that.
Yeah, I'm surprised they aren't on the streets pissed off about it.
They should be pissed off about it, right? But I have to be fair to France, since the drug was developed here, And since it was developed with the assistance of NIH scientists, the French probably don't have the marching rights. They can't go in and take over the patents as our government can. But of course, who is our president? The neoliberal Joe Biden, who told everybody nothing was going to fundamentally change when he was the president. Quote again, Tecardis and Yescarta, manufactured by Gilead scientists to treat cancer, both cost $424,000 in the United States, while the price for Tecardis in Germany is $306,000, and Yescarta is $212,000 in Japan. So, 25% cheaper in Germany, 50% cheaper in Japan. Yescarta is one of two case studies included in the report. The other is Hemgenix, used to treat hemophilia B. As the document details, the world's most expensive medicine with a $3.5 million price tag is the combination of major scientific breakthroughs led by researchers at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and NIH. However, NIH appears to have handed over taxpayer technology while obtaining vanishingly little in return. Licensing agreements reveal that NIH negotiated royalties of around 1% on sales without any pricing constraints. There I have to comment. Okay. Why did they negotiate their royalties in this way? Why? Because of neoliberalism again. It's because the government bureaucrats themselves believe in neoliberalism, believe they shouldn't be burdening the profits of the companies. That's why they don't try to negotiate 50% royalties or 75% royalties on sales. That is why they believe that the companies have a right to their profits even when the NIH researchers helped, or in many cases, actually developed the darn drugs. What usually happens is government scientists entirely develop these drugs, and all the companies do is to commercialize them. They don't have any of the basic research. This could easily be taken over by government production facilities. There could be legislation, I think there should be legislation, that when scientists at NIH develop something, it has to be manufactured by government-owned factories. There shouldn't be any share at all for private sector. Why do we need the private sector? We don't. Oh, but that is socialism. Sure it is. But think of paying, instead of $3.5 million for a drug, think of paying, I don't know, maybe $100, $200, $1,000. So anybody can afford it. Meanwhile, the company behind Hemgenix, Unicure, quietly disclosed that the price was, quote, significant, unquote, and, quote, most patients and their families will not be capable of paying for our products themselves, unquote. Okay, you're getting the idea. I'm not going to go through this whole article. There's a swindle going on here, and the American people are suckers for not stopping it. Why don't the American people stop it? Because too many of us believe in neoliberalism ourselves. Too many of us believe it's a sacred right for private companies to make outrageous profits. And that,
And their TV sets convince them that it's okay for these people to make these sick profits. And then, depending on which team they're on, team red or blue, they listen to what those people say.
absolutely, that is absolutely what happens. Sanders argued Monday that, quote, now is the time for the Biden administration to take executive action to substantially lower the price of prescription drugs and to take on the unacceptable corporate greed of the pharmaceutical industry. Certainly agree with Bernie on this, except I would say it's long past time.
I
Long,
agree.
long past time for that.
Decades past time, like something that should have been handled back in like the 90s or early 2000s.
Yeah, or much before that even. It exists now because of the continued strengthening of neoliberal ideology throughout the 1980s, 1990s, the 2000s. We allowed this ideology to take over the government and to take over the political system. We, the people, should have stopped it, and we're paying
Mhm.
now for not stopping it. So let me go on to
Yeah,
the next evidence of neoliberal um, tomfoolery. What did I do here?
Mhm.
Ah, tax scam. Yes, tax scam. So here we are. Our Republican neoliberal friends just got through swindling America by talking about a faux debt ceiling problem that they themselves created. And of course, Joe Biden allowed them to hold up the American people, hold up, okay, the American government, and extort compromises on spending from the federal government because Mr. Neoliberal Biden was uncomfortable with invoking the 14th Amendment or minting $1 trillion coins to put the Republicans in their place. This is an article by Olivia Rosane on June 10th of 2023. Uh, After threatening to force the government to default over the debt ceiling and also doing lots of damage in the settlement that was finally constructed, Republican lawmakers introduced new tax cuts that could add at least $21 billion to the federal debt over the next decade. Apart from the hypocrisy involved in this, the sheer hypocrisy, there is the neoliberal principle that business people should be taxed as little as possible by government, that there's somehow something wrong with taxing, that it is an illegal taking of private property. That's what the neoliberals believe. They always believe in tax cuts. And they hypocritically, once they put in the tax cuts and cause huge deficits and debts, complain about the federal debt because they are completely wedded to their ideological beliefs that there's only tax money. There is no government money. As Maggie Thatcher used to say, there is no alternative. We can use only tax money to spend, or money we get for borrowing that later we have to pay back through taxes to spend.
The good old neoliberal doctrine, that's about it, not in reality.
Not in
Yeah, all
reality.
they want,
That
all they want.
is,
It's nothing but economic fear porn to make the masses think that the government can somehow go broke, be in debt to another country, which is not the case since the U.S. government is a currency issuing government.
yes, there is all kinds of fear porn dealing with that. But look at
Yeah,
the
like
whole.
earlier, I was listening to a podcast episode that Mike Norman was on in the past where he was talking about like the national debt and all that. And he says that the national debt is merely the nation's savings account. So, and in the words of even Warren Mosler said that the national debt is the sum total of dollars that have not been taxed out of existence yet.
Yes, Warren Mosler says that. Stephanie Kelton says that. Mike Norman says that. Almost any MMT economists you talk to,
And
and I guess
MMT
that
activists
I'm
as
sort
well.
of an MMT economist myself, and I say that too. It is absolutely true. Okay, but look at the arguments of the neoliberals for just a minute. They say, they say that the only way government can get any spending money is through taxation or through borrowing that later must be paid back through taxing people. And then they also say it is wrong to tax business because the businesses are job creators. And if you tax them, then the whole thing will be self defeating because it will be bad for the economy. So the government should be taxing them. So, okay, if the government can only get money to perform its functions by taxing, and if the businesses, okay, and the rich are where the money is, then what the neoliberals are saying is that the government should perform very few functions for society. And in fact, the neoliberals can only believe that governments should pay for policing and for defense. That's all they allow the government to do. So, what they're doing is they're saying there must be austerity for everybody else except the businesses and the rich people. So, screw everybody else. And that is what they offer to people. They offer austerity. And as many people, including myself, have said, austerity is murder. That's what the neoliberals, okay, are offering to us. The ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal, who is one of the worst SOBs when it comes to Medicare for All, also says, quote, it's Republican clockwork, and quote again, not even a week after their manufactured default crisis, and it is back to tax cuts for the wealthy and the well-connected. Okay, says Richie Neal, who, by the way, recognizes that even though he's a big neoliberal himself. Quote, this stoops to a new low even for them. Retroactive corporate tax cuts next to nothing for the most vulnerable children and families. And sneaking in favors for big oil, he continued, quote, make no mistake about it, they're laying the groundwork for even bigger cuts in 2025. And the only way they'll ever achieve a balanced budget is by sticking seniors and working families with the bill. Well, Richie Neal is right about that. That's exactly what they plan to do. They're going to stick us all with the bill while they laugh all the way to the bank. That's what we got to realize about that. So there's a litany in this article following about where the cuts are coming if the Republicans get their way. Of course, we have to admit they won't get all their way, but maybe what they will get is some further debt ceiling crisis, okay, in the future, where they exact further compromises out of some neoliberal democratic president who doesn't want to fight them by using the 14th Amendment or using consoles or using minting platinum coins. On the other hand, if we can get somebody decent into the presidency, like maybe Cornel West, or maybe a Green Party candidate, which may be Cornel West, maybe we can get that stopped, because maybe that person will do what has to be done to defang the neoliberals in the Republican Party. Anyway, it has a list of where federal spending would be cut. It would be cut out of green energy. It would be cut out of electric vehicles. Okay, it would be cut out of various elements of the safety net. It would be cut in all those areas where the constituencies are primarily Democratic constituencies. Because what this is really about is political warfare. What the Republicans are interested in doing is cutting government help for Democratic voters and raising government help for Republican donors. It's all about crony capitalism, which is part of neoliberal politics. So I'm going to leave the rest of this article for now. It's a pretty good article, but we have a lot more to go through, and I do want to get there. So
I did see earlier where Cornel West actually went after RFK in regards to Israel and Palestine and all that, where he told RFK to pretty much lay off the crack pipe.
to lay off the crack pipe?
Yeah, when it come in regards to this brutal slaughter of innocent Palestinian children.
Yes. And innocent Palestinian old people also. And not
Yeah.
simply Palestinian old people, but there was a murder by an Israeli soldier, okay, that we covered in the 8 p.m. show today, who was a Palestinian American. He was an American citizen. And he got dragged and left in the cold and caused to have a heart attack and died, okay, as a result of that. And the American government is just sitting there and just allowing it to happen. It's just absolutely awful. But to say something about Robert Kennedy and Cornel West, I think that Robert Kennedy is also very vulnerable on his recent statements on free market capitalism and how he has great faith in free market capitalism. Frickin' free market capitalism doesn't even exist.
Never has.
Exist.
Like if there was a such thing as a free market, the Federal Trade Commission would be doing its job by breaking up these too big to fail corporations, like what Jill Stein said in 2016.
Yep.
Where she said if she were president, she would put somebody in charge of the FTC to break up the too big to fail corporations and to bring about a more free market economy.
You may be able to bring about, okay, an economy which is less troubled by oligarchy
Mm-hmm.
cannot bring about a free market economy. Because consider, if you're going to do it through regulation, that's not a free market economy. It's a regulated economy. I mean, face it, there can't be a free market economy. There can be a market which is regulated so that the forces of the market work to benefit people. That's a possibility. I think the Chinese are doing a pretty good job of that. But we don't do a good job of that because we bleed about the free market, the free market, or the free market. And all the free market without any regulation produces is oligarchy. And that's why we've got oligarchy in this country. So this is a piece, again, from Common Dreams. There's a picture of Ron Wyden, the senator from Oregon, probably among the second most lefty senators, okay, in the Congress, which isn't to say that he's very lefty. It's just to say that if you take the first five, he ain't in there. He may be in the second five. Wyden calls Kevin McCarthy, Social Security Commission, quote, a glide path to reduce benefits. Of course it is. That's what Kevin McCarthy intends. He wants to reduce benefits. Quote, everything I've heard about it's a prescription for trouble, the Senate Finance Committee chair said of the House Speaker's debt reduction plan. Why would Kevin McCarthy want to reduce Social Security benefits? Well, neoliberals don't believe in Social Security benefits because they believe in free market capitalism. And in the doctrine of free market capitalism, there is no place for Social Security. There is no place for a social safety net. All that kind of thing is superfluous and interferes with the efficiency of the market. One might ask the question, why doesn't Bobby Kennedy understand that himself? He apparently doesn't. Why is he bleating about free market capitalism being the ultimate solution for the climate crisis? If we wait for the free market to solve the climate crisis, we're all garners. I think unless he gets off that particular soapbox, that needs to be a litmus test for his own failure, because that stuff is ridiculous. U.S. Senator Ron Wyden warned that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's commission tasked with reducing the nation's growing debt is a prescription for trouble that will likely result in the slashing of vital programs on which tens of millions of Americans rely, including Social Security. Kevin McCarthy recently announced the launch of a fiscal commission that will find ways to reduce the national debt on the heels of striking a deal with President Joe Biden to suspend the nation's borrowing limit until 2025. Do you guys remember the last time we had a fiscal commission to find ways to reduce the national debt? I do. It was the Peterson-funded commission that Obama instituted in 2010. That was the Fiscal Commission. It was also known as the Cat Food Commission. It was
Cat Food Commission. What the hell's the Cat Food Commission?
The Cat Food Commission was the Fiscal Commission of 2010 that was run by the Obama administration. They appointed the people to sit on this particular commission. They couldn't get Congress to fund the commission, so they turned to the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, and they funded this fiscal commission. Now,
Even bigger mistake there.
somewhere along the line, they made a deal with Congress that Congress would institute certain cuts that were recommended by the fiscal commission if there was a 14-4 vote, okay, of the commission. They couldn't get a 14-4 vote. They got something like I forget if it was 11-7 or whatever, but it wasn't 14-4. So the commission came out with 3 or 4 reports. Some were from the progressives, some were from conservatives, but basically the reports were largely ignored by the Congress. However, the Republicans took matter into their own hands when they recaptured the House in 2011, and they launched at that time in the spring of 2011 the first serious debt ceiling crisis in this country's history. There were some other debt ceiling crises, but they were very minor compared to the debt ceiling crisis of 2011. That led to the Obama administration actually negotiating cuts to spending with the Republicans because, you guessed it, Obama didn't want to invoke the 14th Amendment. And at that point, he didn't even want to mention the platinum coin. I'm sure he probably heard about it because there were lots of debates about it in the press at that time. But it was the same old story of the neoliberal president didn't want to fundamentally change anything. So the people paid the penalty for his perfidy. That almost rhymes, doesn't it? Well, it's an alliteration anyway. While other leading Republicans have embraced the idea of a commission, many Democrats are wary. You shouldn't be wary. You should be breathing fire against it. Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, chairs the Senate Finance Committee, told the Associated Press he views the plan as a way for Republicans to rack up, quote, ideological trophies, unquote. Yeah, neoliberal ideological trophies. Quote, everything I've heard about it, it's a prescription for trouble, Wyden said, adding that Republicans are, quote, looking at a glide path to reduce benefits, unquote. Biden was loudly booed by GOP war makers during his State of the Union. Why did they do that? He's just another neoliberal like themselves. Why were they booing him? When he accused some Republicans of wanting to sunset Social Security, prompting McCarthy to shake his head no. A week earlier, McCarthy had asserted that cuts to Social Security and Medicare, each of which served more than 65 million Americans, were off the table. However, last month, Kevin McCarthy alleged that Biden, quote, walled off, unquote, cuts to Social Security and Medicare during the debt ceiling talks and said the commission would look at reducing funding for both programs. And, quote, I'm going to make some people uncomfortable, the speaker said. So obviously, Kevin McCarthy wants to cut Social Security, okay, and Medicare. He wants to cut the safety nets because he's an effing neoliberal and he believes in cutting safety nets. He doesn't believe in welfare states. He is not a social democrat in ideology. He's a neoliberal, okay, in ideology. Of course, he's not a socialist in ideology either, of course. Anyway, going through the rest of this piece, I guess that's enough. This one was by Brett Wilkins. And so we see further activities of the neoliberal Republicans, specifically Kevin McCarthy, them wanting to go after the safety net, of course. Not that the Democrats want to fully fund the safety net. by any means. I don't want to give the impression I believe that, because the Democrats are often complicit in collaborating with the Republicans to impose austerity by cutting social safety nets or slowing down various kinds of increases in social safety nets. It's all part of a piece. They still all accept the idea that there is no government money, there is only tax money, and that it has to come from taxes. I bet you Ron Wyden believes that too. That might be a subject for another day. The next piece, on the practice, okay, of neoliberalism. This one is a doozy, and I will share it right now. This is also from Common Dreams. I couldn't find a better place to find examples of the practice, okay, of neoliberalism than Common Dreams articles, because they cover that really very well, while not always calling it that. Anyway, there's a photograph of a lady, a senior woman, lying in a bed in an intensive care unit. The headline is, "Why are corporate healthcare fraudsters being handed, quote, get out of jail free cards?" Waivers given by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services allow venture capital, private equity, and health insurance entities the freedom to violate anti-corruption laws without a penalty. And here is our old friend Kay Tillow, who we don't agree with, okay, on everything, because she's opposed to state-level single-payer efforts to get state-level single-payer. So we disagree with her fundamentally on some key questions. But on this article, she is entirely correct. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, the federal agency that oversees those national healthcare programs, has the dubious distinction of being light years ahead of other government regulators in excusing fraudulent conduct. CMS doesn't just allow healthcare companies to repeatedly commit fraud and abuse with fines amounting to a tiny fraction of the profit. CMS goes much further. They formally authorized the violation of anti-corruption laws by granting, quote, fraud and abuse, unquote, waivers to the corporate entities involved in experimental programs within its Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, CMMI, or Innovation Center. Now, I should remark here, I don't know whether this is still the case, but I suspect, okay, it is. Biden's appointment to head the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, the CMMI, was Liz Fowler, Elizabeth Fowler. Who is Liz Fowler? Liz Fowler was one of the prime authors of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, the PPACA, otherwise known as the Affordable Care Act, the pride of the Obama administration. The CMMI itself is a product of the Affordable Care Act, and it is the center of the efforts to privatize the Medicare program that are going on right now. Liz Fowler is also well known as the mistress of Senator Max Baucus. Okay, and she got this role of helping to write the Affordable Care Act because Max Baucus was instrumental in writing the Affordable Care Act, and Liz Fowler went from Max Baucus's staff to Max Baucus's bed to the WellPoint, the corporation, and ended up writing a considerable part of the Affordable Care Act uh, in order to favor the interests of the WellPoint, the corporation that she had been involved with. I've forgotten what the exact sequence was. Uh, she worked on Baucus's staff. She got into his bed. She left his staff. She went to work for WellPoint. She came back to serve on the staff. She helped to specify the Affordable Care Act. Then she went to work again for private sector companies in the healthcare industry. And she did that for quite a number of years, getting favors for large corporations. And so then, of course, the neoliberal president, Joe Biden, appointed the neoliberal Liz Fowler to head up the CMMI. One of his worst appointments.
Surprise.
Surprise, surprise, yes. By the way, it's typical, okay, of neoliberalism that it seeks partnerships between the government and the private sector. And in those partnerships, the government is supposed to absorb any of the losses, and the private sector is supposed to get all the profits, okay, if any. Liz Fowler certainly believes in that. It's certainly what she works for. And we can see that in the policies of CMMI today. That is neoliberalism, an important aspect of neoliberalism. And that is also known as lemon socialism. You were about to say something, Greg. Okay. CMS regularly issues fraud and abuse waivers to the healthcare industry giants that participate in its innovation center programs, impacting millions of people. If it's an accountable care organization, an ACO, the new form of the hated the managed care organizations, the HMOs of the 1990s, infamous for drive-through mastectomies, it won't be held accountable to the laws of the land. How can this be possible? The Affordable Care Act of 2010, amongst many provisions, set up the Innovation Center within CMS to promote experimental models in Medicare that would save money while maintaining or improving quality, or that would cost the same while improving the quality of care. The models approved by CMS can be automatically implemented into Medicare without congressional approval. Liz Fowler wrote that into the Affordable Care Act of 2010. And now she's directly administering the privatization of Medicare that comes from that.
That's like Medicare Advantage on steroids.
It is like Medicare Advantage on steroids. And don't think that she did not have a lot to do with Medicare Advantage herself. She did. She's been working this vein of gold for at least 2 decades, maybe more. The Innovation Center models are not working to accomplish stated purposes of quality and cost savings, says Kay Tillow. Quote, the majority have not saved money, and several are on pace to lose billions of dollars, unquote, reports Bill Frist. Who is Bill Frist? Bill Frist is the former senator and majority leader of the Senate when the Republicans held the Senate in the early 2000s. He was instrumental in the passage of Medicare Part D under George Bush. He was not just a senator, it says here, he was the majority leader. He's also the owner of a giant hospital chain, HCA. But even he says the majority of models do not show significant improvements in quality. Says Brad Smith, former Innovation Center director. The models are neither saving money nor improving care. But the Innovation Center has $10 billion to spend each decade and keeps churning out new models, the latest on June 8th. The Innovation Center models are the ones to which CMS grants the fraud and abuse waivers. That is neoliberalism at its finest. Reward innovation by seeing to it that the innovators don't bear any risk at all. You put the risk on the government, you put the risk on the people, but the entrepreneurs don't take any risks. But haven't we all heard that entrepreneurs are wonderful risk takers? CMS proposes to remove the risks with the fraud and abuse waivers. Let's take, for instance, Medicare Advantage plans that are advertised to offer cash back on your Social Security check or up to $900 a year in grocery money. I'm sure you've seen those ads. They're all over.
All the time.
All the time. Those offers would logically be a violation of the law that forbids the offer of inducements to buy a certain plan. But these plans operate under the Innovation Center experiment called, quote, by Medicare Advantage Value-Based Insurance Design, VBID, model. So why isn't it VBIDM? Anyway, it's VBID, Value-Based Insurance Design Model. What does that even mean? That model has the get out of jail free card from CMS. For the plan year 2023, the VBID model has 52 participating Medicare Advantage organizations with a total of 9.3 million people projected to be enrolled. CMS waives the beneficiary inducement civil monetary penalty and the federal anti-kickback statute to allow Medicare Advantage VBID plans to provide these cash, grocery, and other incentives. The excuse is that these payments are contributing to equity by ending disparities. The reality is that such plans provide incentives for seniors and the disabled to choose the for-profit plans rather than traditional Medicare. That's convenient for the Medicare Advantage companies that are using the Medicare Trust Fund as their cash cow. And Medicare Advantage plans cost the nation more than traditional Medicare, yet deny, delay, and limit care. So why is CMS promoting the growth of these plans? Among the long list of accountable care organizations, ACOs, and other models that CMS excuses from obeying the law is the Vermont all-payer ACO model, Vermont Medicare ACO initiative, which is called One Care ACO Vermont. The League of Women Voters of Vermont and the Physicians for a National Health Program of Vermont, among others, urged an end to the Innovation Center's One Care ACO experimental model, stating that the for-profit One Care ACO by design does nothing to improve access to care and that the ACO was supposed to reduce costs, but instead, spending continues to rise even faster than established targets. Their Vermont organizations issued a press release and listed 11 reasons why the program should be ended, including the assertion that both hospitals and primary care are suffering from the program. Quote, it is time to redirect wasteful administrative spending on the ACO to actually providing health care, especially as the coronavirus pandemic exposes and exacerbates inequities in our system, quote. The Vermont organizations concluded. I just want to illuminate something that was said here about the wasteful administrative spending on the ACO. The administrative spending there comes from the fact that in the ACO plan, there are no controls on the amount of overhead that can be charged by the ACO, but types of organizations. When they're in the program, they can have up to, well, they have been having up to 45 to 50% of overhead charges to the government for their efforts. In other places in the Affordable Care Act, there are limits on the amount of overhead and administrative spending that the providers can have. There's a limit of 15% on those, so 85% is the loss ratio, which is allowed even in the Medicare Advantage program. But in the ACO REACH program, we've seen loss ratios of 55% or 50% or 60%. In other words, much higher administrative costs used by the ACO entities to loot the Medicare trust fund. The Vermont experiment by the Innovation Center has the fraud and abuse waivers. The for-profit OneCare Vermont is exempted from the federal physician self-referral law and the anti-kickback law. The program is scheduled to continue through the end of 2024, despite the community's protests over the damage that OneCare Vermont has done to the health care of the state. The privatization of Medicare through Medicare Advantage and Innovation Center models requires the freedom of the corporate, medical, and insurance entities to collect overpayments, escape oversight, avoid regulation, and violate anti-corruption laws without any penalty. The Innovation Center granted the fraud and abuse waivers to the direct contracting model and to its successor program, ACO REACH. ACO REACH currently has 132 participants in states across the country and places seniors and the disabled who chose traditional Medicare into for-profit and private Medicare ACOs. Seniors are assigned to these programs without their consent to ACO REACH plans owned by private equity, venture capital, and insurance companies who can take upwards of 25% of the Medicare money for profit, and overhead. Yes, it is upwards. As I said, it's been as high as 40%, 45%, and 50%. In addition, ACO REACH creates an incentive that increases profits with the denial or restriction of care. The Innovation Center models are not working to produce cost savings and quality. CMS continues them anyway, ignoring a storm of protest by healthcare advocates. Of course, it's Liz Fowler. The Innovation Center plans continue because they serve a different purpose, an unnamed purpose. They serve the privatization of the Medicare program. All of these plans have private managers, specifically middlemen intervening between patients and their physicians or other caregivers. Why would a government agency issue caregivers issue waivers for fraud and abuse? Why would that agency give venture capital, private equity, and health insurance entities the freedom to violate anti-corruption laws without penalty? What possible good can come from this, and why should the Innovation Center be allowed to continue to exist? The privatization of Medicare through Medicare Advantage and Innovation Center models requires the freedom of the corporate medical and insurance entities to collect overpayments, escape oversight, avoid regulation, and violate anti-corruption laws without penalty. CMS allows massive overpayments, bribes, and also denials of care as it places our cherished Medicare into private hands. As CMS issues waivers of fraud and abuse laws, the privatization is unleashed on an unsuspecting population. So that's that article. I read the whole thing because it was very good, but also it's a fantastic illustration of the penetration of a public program by the private sector to take over the public program and to socialize the losses and to privatize the profits. We don't need that. In other places, I've pointed out that we currently spend $4.3 trillion annually, okay, in healthcare spending in the United States. That is the figure given by CMS, okay, itself. It is clear, based on what we spend per patient and what peer nations also spend per person on their healthcare programs, that if we implemented a Medicare for All program, we could save perhaps 50% on what we spend now. We could cut those expenditures from 4.3 T down to 2.2 P or 2.1 T. The federal government is already spending $3.1 trillion out of the $4.3 trillion that is spent. So the federal government itself, not to mention the American people, since there's no deficit spending for healthcare, could save $1 trillion per year by shifting to Medicare for All. The American people could save $2 trillion per year if we shifted to Medicare for All. That's the difference between 2.1 trillion and 4.3 trillion. Over 10 years, that's $24 trillion. And many stupid progressive estimators are going out there claiming that over 10 years we'll save 4 trillion or 7 trillion because they're afraid of using common sense to try to figure out how much we're really going to spend if we have a Medicare for All program. What would a Medicare for All program do? It would cut out all the insurance middle people. They would have no role in that program. They could no longer gyp us all. But of course, we can't do that because it violates neoliberalism and the ideology, okay, of neoliberalism. One more piece on neoliberal practice, and then I'm going to quit for the night. I'm getting tired. That piece is from Karen Dolan. Who is Karen Dolan? She is from an organization known, okay, as Other Words. She wants to abolish the debt ceiling. Let me share this.
That's the first common sense thing I've heard all night. Abolish the debt ceiling.
Abolish the debt ceiling for a better future. While Biden was able to hold off the worst harm, this deal still causes significant harm to ordinary people and sets a terrible precedent for more hostage taking. Who does hostage taking serve? It serves the neoliberals. It gives them a chance to introduce austerity because it freezes federal deficit spending. That's how it serves the austerity mongers and the neoliberals. Anyway, she talks about the Fiscal Responsibility Act that Biden signed into law recently, and she credits him with repelling the worst of the House Republican demands, which included slashing social programs and government services by 60%. That would have utterly devastated everything from Head Start and Pell Grants to job training, housing and nutrition assistance, and even air traffic safety. Talking points from the White House paint the bipartisan deal as a victory for ordinary people, but that isn't the whole story. Yeah, it wasn't a victory for ordinary people. The bill will still cut or freeze many programs that were already underfunded by the last debt ceiling drama in 2011. What do you mean the last debt ceiling drama in 2011? How about the debt ceiling drama of 2012 to 2013? How about that one, which was followed by the fiscal cliff? Even as it increases military spending by a whopping $28 billion, evidently she doesn't know about the debt ceiling crisis of 2012 to 2013 and all the cuts that brought for years, created the slowest recovery from recession in history. And she doesn't know about it, bringing the Pentagon to a shocking 56% share of the budget that Congress sets each year. The deal also prevents Biden from pausing student loan payments and imposes harsh work requirements, quote unquote, for some recipients of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, also known as food stamps, and the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families Program, the TANF program. Work requirements don't encourage work, they just make it more difficult for even eligible families to get help. Well, she's right about all this, and she points out in the final blow, the deal cuts corners on environmental review for energy projects and specifically greenlights the Mountain Valley Pipeline, a pet project of Senator Joe Manchin for a highly destructive fossil fuel pipeline for his state. Authorization of this pipeline had failed every other legislative attempts, but Joe Manchin got his licks in. The neoliberal Joe Manchin got his licks in from a neoliberal debt ceiling crisis that was compromised by the neoliberal Joe Biden president, who wanted to give the private sector some kind of compromise and to further screw the public sector. Hacking back social programs and basic government services while spending more money on the Pentagon, by far the largest part of the discretionary budget, proves none of this was about reducing the debt. So does the fact the GOP allowed no tax increases on the wealthiest Americans or corporations to raise revenue. Of course not. They never do that. Okay. Instead, GOP House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's Republican caucus insisted on taking the debt ceiling and the American people hostage to their demands to slash funding for programs that benefit people other than the wealthy and military contractors. This after they raised the debt ceiling 3 times under Trump, who added $7.8 trillion to the national debt In fact, Republicans are currently preparing a bill that will extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts for the wealthy, which would, the Congressional Budget Office estimates, add $3.5 trillion more to the debt over the next decade. But of course, it's okay to kick up the debt in order to give greater economic gains to the rich and to the corporations. While Biden was able to hold off the worst harm, this deal still causes significant harm to ordinary people. Right about that. Future Congress should abolish the debt ceiling. Well, yeah, but why didn't Congress abolish the debt ceiling when the Democrats, had total control of Congress in 2009 and 2010? It would have taken an afternoon for them to abolish the debt ceiling. Even in the spring of 2010, when the polls were showing that their clocks were going to be cleaned in the fall of 2010, they could have avoided a debt ceiling crisis by abolishing the debt ceiling. Even as the Republicans, who had not been elected yet, were threatening to use the debt ceiling law to negotiate gains for themselves. And yet the Democrats did not take one afternoon to abolish the debt ceiling. That's all it would have taken. And they had overwhelming majorities in 2010 in the Senate and in the House. They could have abolished the debt ceiling with a reconciliation bill. They could have even gotten around the filibuster. Issues about the debt ceiling do come under the heading of reconciliation if you want to invoke that. They didn't want to invoke that. Why doesn't she discuss this? Why doesn't she point out how big the failings of Democrats have been, for that matter, when they passed the American Rescue Plan using reconciliation at the beginning of the Biden administration? Why didn't they abolish the debt ceiling as part of that law? Does anybody know? That would have been the easiest thing to do. They had the history of what the Republicans do. They had the history of the other debt ceiling crises. Why didn't they just do it as a matter of course? Because the Democrats are neoliberal co-conspirators. They are complicit in these debt ceiling crises because the neoliberal Democrats want to cut, they want to reduce the national debt, want to reduce the deficits. That's what Obama wanted to do. That's what Joe Biden wanted to do when he was Obama's vice president. That's what he wanted to do when he was a senator. And that's what he wants to do now as president of the United States. His biggest dream is to be able to say, I was the president who made compromises with the Republicans. His ass really needs to be kicked out of office. She says, finally, in ending, if Congress won't act, the president should intervene with his considerable executive power and invoke Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, which says the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. He could even mint enough money to ensure there would be no default and no harm to families. She's absolutely right. But why isn't she calling him out for not doing it this time? Democratic lawmakers and President Biden didn't take any of these steps, instead opting to negotiate with their hostage takers. Right. So why don't you say more about how perfidious this was? Next time, she says, they shouldn't make the same mistake. Obviously, it wasn't a mistake. They intended to negotiate with the hostage takers. They intended to impose penalties on working people. They intended to make it more difficult for students, and for eliminating debt. They intended all these things. That's why they negotiated. That is why they negotiated. So tonight has been about the prevalence, and I should even say the domination of American politics by neoliberal practices. That's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the undercutting, the disempowering of democracy by the neoliberal ideologues in both houses, okay, of Congress. How do we end this? We dump the corruption.
I was going to say that. Dump the corruption.
We get rid of them. Every last one of them.
Exactly. And don't let the door hit them on the way out.
No mercy.
None at all.
No mercy. Every one of them needs to get kicked out. Others need to be voted in who are not beholden to any of the big money. Let them have their crack at governing the United States. At least they will try to represent us, especially knowing that we dumped all the people who took the big money. So, Dee, any comments?
I enjoyed the show. I thought it was very informative, going over stuff and explaining it in detail. We've lived through this, but having that refresher, and for people that don't know, it really explained and went through things. So I thought it was a very good presentation.
And always emphasizing the connection to neoliberalism
Exactly, it's
in
important.
every one of these cases to show how important it is that we ditch the ideology and the people who follow it.
Yes, and Greg said that his phone died, so that's why he's off.
Okay. Okay, let's move to the comments. I see Steve Wolfbrand is here and has made a bunch of comments. Robert Copeland is here. Kay is here. And there's a bunch of greetings. Kay says we should have had Bernie. Oh, yeah. I so wish.
Yes, we all do.
I so wish that Bernie had refused to get out in 2016 and had run Green Party then. The future might have become entirely different. Steve Wolfman says depopulation, Dr. John Campbell, excess deaths, thoughts. Why are there still these excess deaths?
Yeah, he brought that up when I had said the comment with neoliberalism, with useless eaters.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's valid. I think the excess deaths are there because of all kinds of difficulties due to neoliberal policies where we can't establish the exact causation from the increasing reliance on neoliberal policies. But I think that's what's happening. I think that's a really good hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve says AI, robots, UFO disclosures, all of them will soon disrupt your view of economics. Beware. Why would they disrupt the view of economics that I have? I don't see how they would affect the views on economics I have. Those views, okay, are views about how public finance works, how politics works, how you can improve the current situation. I mean, I think there are going to be very interesting impacts of AI and robots and UFO disclosures, but I don't think basic views of economics, specifically the MMT lens, okay, I don't see how they would change. Steve says, Doc, of course I love you, brother, but I don't think you're looking at the big picture. Well, Steve, my friend, the feeling, okay, is mutual. I think you're looking at what are distractions from the central issues. Robert Copeland, I don't think a person running as a Green Party or any other third party will get much done unless we get more people in Congress that support the people instead of big corporate. I completely agree. We need Green Party people and third party people in Congress. If Dump the Corruption was successful, all the Democrats and all the Republicans would lose. All we would have is third party people in Congress. Corporations, even bigger now than back in 2016. Yeah, they are. And they're more powerful. Robert says, hi, everybody. I just got in here a few minutes ago. AI could easily replace 40% of jobs in 5 to 10 years. Some people say 2 years. Steve, that's fine. But as I said last night, we could create new jobs in the job guarantee program for all those who are replaced. And we can give them socially inclusive wages for all of them, for all the people who are displaced. And we could set the socially inclusive wages at the places we wanted to set those wages. And if the productivity gains that are predicted from AI were there would be no problem paying the people the higher wages because the AIs don't need wages. So if productivity goes up, let's say 1,000%, due to AI, we could pass on the gains through the federal job guarantee to all the people who lost their jobs. Wouldn't that be cool? There's a political solution to AI. It's already on the table. It doesn't change my views about economics because the job guarantee is an economic program on the table right now coming out of MMT. Why don't you believe that would solve the AI problem if we could legislate it? And we can legislate it if we dump the corruption, Steve. Robert Copeland says, I seen a video of Marjorie Taylor Greene comparing Donald Trump to Jesus after Trump.
Oh,
Next
my
thing you
goodness.
know, she's going to compare herself to Mary Magdalene.
Oh my God.
It's too much.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that.
Oh, joy.
These
Kay,
people are
okay, guys,
nuts.
I'm out of here for tonight. I love you all. Thank you, Kay. Steve says, good night, Kay. Robert Copeland says ACA should be called the UCA, or as I call it, the Unaffordable Care Act. Do you really think AI quantum computing, Roberts, will care about your coin? Or the extraterrestrials? No, they don't have to care about our coin. Look, I only advocate for the coin because in this context, the context that the president has the power, okay, to do the coin, makes it politically convenient for him to do the coin to counter the Republicans. But my preference isn't for the coin. My preference is for overt congressional financing. What is that? It is Congress ordering the Federal Reserve to create the money in the Treasury spending account to spend appropriations when the appropriations are made, when the appropriations laws are passed. That should be boilerplate. It's 2 short sentences in every appropriation bill or money bill. That should be boilerplate in the Congress. And it would be boilerplate if we could throw out all these Republicans and all these Democrats and get all third-party people in there. So I don't care if the quantum computing Roberts care about the coin or the extraterrestrials care about the coin. What I want is for our representatives, all humans in Congress, not taking any donations from big money. I want them to care about overt congressional financing. How's that for an answer to your query, Steve? Open your mind. 40% of people's jobs involve driving. New jobs, open your mind. New jobs can be created for those people. Did you ever see the list of new jobs put forward by Fadl Kaboub? Did you see all the great new jobs that could be made available? The jobs that could be made available to job guarantee people are limited only by our imagination. For example, why isn't what I do a job that should be funded by the federal job guarantee? What I do is valuable. There's no reason why it shouldn't come under the job guarantee program. There's no reason why I shouldn't be getting a socially inclusive wage for this. And if the AIs take over the various jobs we have and increase the productivity to such a great extent, which is what they're supposed to do, then that socially inclusive living wage that I could have would be much greater than any socially inclusive living wage now. I mean, I'd be in seventh heaven. Why not? We can do that, Steve. We can do it. Open your mind, Steve. Steve says they lie. 9/11 was an inside job. Seth Rich was murdered. Epstein didn't kill himself. Building 7 didn't commit suicide. Steve, that might all be true. That might all be true. Steve, Obama's mom was CIA. Steve says, I'm going to bed, vote RFK. If it doesn't work, vote Cornell. Hey, Steve, before you go to bed, I guess you've already gone to bed. Maybe you'll check back, though, on this. So if you check back, don't vote RFK if he sticks with this free market capitalism nonsense. I'm telling you, Steve, if he really believes in free market capitalism, we're all doomed by the climate crisis. RFK has got to get educated in certain key areas. Those include the MMT area. They also include what's wrong with free market capitalism. RFK has ignored certain areas in his education which are vital. And he's showing us by the comments he makes to people, not to mention foreign policy. I mean, when it comes to backing Israel, he's too far over to the right. He says he respects Palestinian rights, but what is he willing to do for them right now?
Exactly.
No rights. What is he willing to do for them? I hate to say it, but inquiring minds want to know.
Exactly. We want to know.
Okay, I think that does the comments. Have you any more comments, Steve, before we sign off?
Yeah, we have to really pay attention to, RFK. And like you said, this whole free market thing, and then this whole thing with Israel. Richard Medhurst, I just saw a clip come over here. It's just talking about RFK, I guess, on what he said about Israel. Let's take a look at it, see what it's about.
We need to really question him about also neoliberalism. There was an article yesterday by Naomi Klein. I did not cover it here because it wasn't actually directly relevant,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to do it now, but maybe I'll do it in a future thing. But she wrote an article for The Intercept in which she took down RFK, and part of what the article was about was his free market capitalism shtick that he's been doing. Oh yeah, that was. Oh, I have a Common Dreams link for that. Why do I have a Common Dreams link for it? The article was original. I believe the article was originally in The Intercept. I might be wrong about that. Anyway, I have a link to a Common Dreams article about that. But she critiqued him on 4 grounds. One of them was a Palestinian issue, but also free market capitalism. Okay, was in there. Okay, but there were 2 other issues which she also covered. But yeah, it was a pretty good article. It merits, I think, an answer from him. But we don't have time to cover it, okay, tonight. So I think
No, we don't. That would be another night.
I think it's time to say goodnight. Thank you,
think so
Dee,
too. Yeah,
for
thank you for a great show.
for sticking with me for so long.
It was a great show. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. I certainly appreciate it. Okay, good night.
And please hit the like button, subscribe, and share.
All right, and this is Friday. So I suspect I'll see you at least one day over the weekend.
Wait a minute. Today's Friday. I thought it was.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's only Thursday.
Yeah, I was getting confused about the days myself.
All right. So I will see you tomorrow then. I have a Dump the Corruption show. I'll be going over 5 more of the Democratic senators. And I'm sure Dee will be having a show at 8 o'clock as well.
Yes, I don't know what I'm going over, but I will be going over something.
And I will join that show for sure.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I appreciate you. No, it's important. It's a type of show that you want to have conversation.
Yes.
Analysis.
Yes, we want to have conversations. We want to do analysis. And we want to cover issues in the international system around the world that are not being covered elsewhere, at least not in the depth that we're covering them.
That's true.
So, okay, good night, Dee.
Good night.